The sound of hoop steps was an unnatural sound. The surrounding wood greeted the unexpected visitor with its usual response, gathering the local residents for its signature song. Crickets chirped, their legs moving like bows on a violin, sad and high, as the wind whistled, dodging through the trees, as it joined to rush the choir of the woods. Owls hooted in the distance, adding their part to the song, even though too shy to show their faces. Higher up, leaves rustled as the wind blew past them, and the trees' branches shook, adding low creaking sounds to the chorus. The source of the disturbance glanced around nervously as she headed deeper into the forest. Although she knew that it was all in her head, the young mare couldn't help but feel like she was being watched. The gaze of another felt like it was burrowing into her like a worm into the ground. She took a few deep breaths, trying to soothe her troubled nerves. She sighed and began to observe her surroundings. Much of the place was familiar to her. She had played in the forest often as a child. Certain spots she remembered more than others. A small glade with a large rock sitting in the center brought up an old memory as she passed. She was climbing the rock, pretending to be a mountain goat. Another memory flashed. This was also the place where she had met her best friend. She had never seen the other filly in town before, and although she had wondered why, she had never broached the subject with her friend. Regardless, the two quickly became best friends, and her friend had served as a source of wonder and entertainment, as a source of comfort, a second home. At home, things were never as joyful. Her mother drank a lot, and her father was almost never home. If her friend wasn't there to comfort her at times of stress, when her mother shook her anger out on her, she wasn't sure how she would deal with it those harsh years of her life. The memory faded, and the mare sighed, before turning and trudging on. The cold winds of the Everfree sent a shiver down her spine, and she wrapped her wings around herself to try and contain the warmth in her body. Pegasai had little control over anything here, and she had forgotten her jacket, so she had to work with what she had. Another area caught her eye. She approached it, her mouth curling into a small smile. The large tree before her had memories surrounding it. She had loved running in circles around that base, climbing and flying around its sturdy branches. Her and her friend had often played here, enjoying a game of hide-and-seek, or playing around in the high branches of the tree. One memory in particular stood out. The mare could recall it with surprising accuracy. Her friend had found an injured bird. It had injured its wing somehow, and her friend had decided to help it. She handed the bird to the Pegasus filly and climbed the tree. A few minutes later, she came back down, carrying a nest with several baby birds inside. Babies were going insane, cheeping and thrashing around, a sign that they were probably hungry. Her friend said maybe seeing her kids would somehow heal the mother, and took them behind some bushes for some privacy. The sounds of cheeping stopped after a few seconds later. Before the filly could head behind the bushes to investigate, her friend came back, a big smile on her face. It had been a miracle, she had said. The mother had suddenly gotten better, perhaps with the love of magic, and lifted off, carrying the nestful of children off to another tree. While her friend spoke, the filly had noticed a few drops of what looked like blood on her friend's face. She asked if she was okay, and her friend wiped her hoof across her face, explaining that a few branches had scratched her while she was climbing the tree. The memory ended there. Although she hadn't found it odd back then, now that she thought about it, that didn't seem right about that explanation. Her friend wasn't a unicorn. She didn't possess healing magic. A branch snapped from somewhere nearby, snapping the mare to attention. The feeling of being watched arose in her again. She stared off into the darkness, trying to spot whatever she thought could be out there. All she could see, however, was trees. Lots of trees. She shook her head, trying to find her reason to be here. She wasn't going to be scared off by some sounds in the dark. Thinking about why she was here made her remember her final memory of this place. Her family was moving. She'd been happy to leave. She had stared out at the forest as it slowly began to shrink as they sped off into the distance. She had never said goodbye to her friend. In fact, it almost seemed like she had forgotten about her entirely, seeing as she had no complaints about leaving. She'd come back, for closure. She lived far away, but long-forgotten memories of her time with her old friend had resurfaced for the first time in many years. Now she was here, to say goodbye properly to the pony who made her foalhood bearable. Even though chances of her old friend still being here were slim, at least she would show some respect. She was almost at her destination, a place she had considered to be the heart of the Everfree, even though it was far from the center. It was also the place where her last interaction with her friend had been. Pushing through some dense foliage, the young mare found herself in a large glade, surrounded by a ring of trees. Something about the place filled the Pegasus with unease. Her eyes scanned the area around her. Her wings twitched in agitation. Something caught her eye. A large dent that had been made in a tree. The dent hadn't been made by any animal who lived there. It looked more like some pony had bucked the tree in a fit of rage. Regardless, something about the dent in the tree triggered another memory. A memory the mare hadn't even known existed. She was screaming and sobbing. She crawled away from the filly she thought was her best friend. Her hooves were cackling, slowly moving towards the crying filly, every step leaving behind a bloody hoofprint. Her hooves were stained with the blood of another pony, who lay several feet away, partially devoured and unmoving. Her friend stomped down on one of the other's legs, causing the filly to cry out in pain. The blow was followed by a kick, which sent the injured filly rolling into the base of a tree. She whimpered, tears streaming from her eyes as she gazed up at the pony she had called friend. There was no escape. Her friend was going to kill her, and then eat her, just like that other pony, just like those birds. The crazed filly brought a hoof up to strike, without a hint of remorse brought it down. The young mare let out a gasp, as she flailed for a second, before tripping as she tried to step back from the horrifying images of her brain. She hit the ground hard and groaned in pain. The memory, it had been so real. She now remembered how it had ended. The hoof had smashed into the tree behind her, just barely missing her head, while also taking a huge chunk out of the tree. Something black had begun leaking out of her attacker's hoof, and almost as if she had burst a blood vessel, her eyes started leaking a similar black fluid. Taking several steps back, leaving a trail of ooze, the crazed filly let out an almost primeval scream, before turning and fleeing the scene. The young mare had never told any pony about what had transpired here. She knew they would never believe her. When she finally got home, she lied about the wounds she had received. When she had informed by her parents that they were moving, she had been overjoyed to know they would be leaving the Everfree Forest behind. Over time, as the traumatic experience faded into her past, her mind locked the memories away. Good reason. The mare shakily stood up, her gaze falling on that tree again. Something about that crater still being there told her something was wrong. She should leave now. The sense of something watching her seemed to intensify as she quickly made her way out of the forest, and the presence followed her all the way home.